Let me start by saying this plainly. Nothing inappropriate happened. Nothing psychical and nothing that crossed the line anymore could point to. But when I realized that people were watching me, I understood something had already slipped out of my control. The meeting had ended. Chairs moved back. Papers shuffled. The slow tired noses people make when entirely ready to leave. I stayed seated longer than I need to, pretended to read notice already know by heart that when I noticed it.
Two people still looking at me. Not at her. At me. One of them stopped near the door, his hand frozen on the handle. The other slowed down, eyes flicking in my direction, then away again. At 57, you don't ask what that means. You recognize it the way you recognize a bad look in the mirror. Glass walls. Her floor. The wrong place to draw attention. My mouth went dry instantly. I pressed my tongue against the roof of it and swallowed. Nothing helped. My knee was jammed under the table, locked there like it belonged. I didn't move it. Moving felt like admitting something I hadn't decided how to name yet. When I finally looked up, she wasn't packing her things. She had stepped around the table and was standing closer than before. Not close in a personal way. Close in a deliberate one. She didn't smile. She didn't lower her voice. "If you want to look," she said evenly, "just ask." The sentence didn't sound like an accusation. That's what made it worse. My fingers tightened around the pen in my hand. The plastic edge bit into my palm. I welcomed the sting. It gave me something simple to focus on. I stood too fast. The chair shrieked across the floor, louder than it should have. Somewhere outside the room, someone coughed. My throat tasted like metal. "Wait," I said. My voice came out thinner than it sounded in my head. That was allowed. The words landed and immediately felt wrong. I tried to recover. Too quickly. I added, and this is the part one still cringe at, I wasn't staring. Not like that. The silence that followed was brutal. There it was. The mistake. The unnecessary explanation. The kind men my age learn to make when they're nervous, talking just to fill space, hoping words can clean something they only smear further. Her expression didn't change, but something in the room did. The air tightened. She waited. "Let me sit in it. Only if you know why you're asking," she said finally. No warmth. No warning. Just the truth, placed carefully where I couldn't dodge it. I had a safer answer ready. Polite. Professional. Something that would end this cleanly. I almost used it. Instead, I said, "My hands are shaking." They were. I hadn't noticed until I said it out loud. And I don't like what it says about me that I'm pretending otherwise. Her eyes dropped to my hands once. Just once. Then back to my face. "That tend to happen," she said, "when people realize they're visible." She picked up her folder and turned toward the door, as if the conversation had reached a natural end. As if she had corrected something and didn't need to stay for the aftermath. Then she stopped. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to be heard. "Think carefully," she said, "about who benefits when you disappear." And then she walked out. I stayed standing there, alone in that glass room. The pen still cutting into my palm. My knee still pressed hard against the table. Through the wall, I saw the reflection of someone passing by in the hallway. One of the two. He glanced in. Just for a second. Then kept walking. That was the part that followed me home. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Nothing anyone could write down cleanly. But now I knew something else too. If I saw her again like that, if someone else saw us again like that, this wouldn't stay quiet. And for the first time, the risk wasn't just about me. The morning after, nothing exploded. No emails. No messages. No quiet summons that begin with "Do you have a minute?" That should have calmed me down. It didn't. I woke up earlier than usual, sat at the kitchen table longer than I needed to, staring into a mug of coffee that tasted wrong for no reason I could name. When a day refuses to acknowledge what happened the night before, it has a way of making you question your own memory. The drive to work felt longer. Same streets. Same lights. But I caught myself checking mirrors, adjusting my jacket, paying attention to things I hadn't thought about in years. At my age, that alone should have told me something had shifted. Inside the building, everything worked as designed. People nodded, smiled, asked about the weekend. No one mentioned the meeting. No one hinted at anything out of place. That silence felt practiced. I didn't see her that morning. Not until after lunch. And when I did, it wasn't a moment you'd notice unless you were already looking for it. She stepped out of an office mid-conversation, paused just long enough to let me see her, then kept walking without looking my way. Not avoidance. Control. That's when I realized I had a choice. I could let yesterday dissolve into ambiguity. Pretend it had been misinterpreted. That's a strategy men like me learn early and refine over decades. It's safe. It's invisible. And it costs more than you think. Or I could do something riskier. I booked a small conference room without knowing what I'd say. No plan. No clever opening. Just the understanding that avoidance is still a decision, and not always a neutral one. She arrived without knocking. "I don't have much time," she said, closing the door behind her. "So let's be precise." That word landed harder than I expected. "This isn't about yesterday," she continued, before I could speak. I hesitated. "Then why does it feel like it is?" There it was. The first mistake. Too direct. Too fast. The kind of thing you say when you don't yet know where the floor is. She didn't react immediately. She studied me instead, the way people do when they're deciding whether something deserves correction or dismissal. "Because you're uncomfortable," she said finally. "And discomfort has a way of attaching itself to the nearest explanation." That stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was clean. "I wasn't confused," I said, and then, against my better judgment, added, "I just didn't expect you to notice." The second mistake. Worse than the first. Her expression changed. Just slightly. Enough to tell me I'd crossed into a different part of the conversation. "I notice everything on my floor," she said. "The question is what I choose to do with it." There it was. The line that could be read two ways. Reassuring or threatening. Honest or calculated. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how small the room felt. "Then why say anything at all?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Because silence gives people room to invent stories. And I don't like being written into narratives I didn't agree to." That sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. "And you," she asked. "What story would you have told yourself if I'd said nothing?" I didn't answer right away. The truth wasn't flattering. That it didn't matter, I said. That I could disappear and things would stay simple. Her mouth tightened. Not a smile, not a frown. "That's usually when things stop being simple," she replied. We stood there a moment longer than necessary. The air between us steady, but charged with something I couldn't name. When she finally reached for her folder, I thought the conversation was over. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "honesty doesn't protect anyone from consequences. It just makes them visible sooner." Then she left. I stayed behind, staring at the empty chair across from me. Outside the glass wall, someone passed by slowly. I couldn't see his face, just the reflection of movement. He lingered a second, then moved on. As I walked back to my office, a thought settled in that hadn't been there that morning. If someone chose to misunderstand what they'd seen, if someone decided to tell the wrong version, there would be no clean way to correct it. And this time, disappearing wouldn't be an option. The first sign that things were no longer contained came in the form of a sentence that wasn't meant for me. I heard it in passing, half a conversation near the elevators. Someone laughing too quietly. Someone else saying, "That's not how it looked to me." Then the doors closed, and I was left standing there with the echo of words that hadn't existed the day before. That's how these things start. Not with accusations. With tone. By mid-morning, the building felt different. Not hostile. Alert. People still nodded. Still smiled. But their eyes lingered a fraction longer. Just enough to make me aware of my own posture, my own hands, the distance I kept from everyone else. At my age, you learn to read that shift fast. It's the moment before a story decides what it's going to be. I tried to work through it. I really did. Focused on numbers, timelines, things that behaved the way they were supposed to. But then the email arrived. No subject line, no greeting, just a forwarded message, stripped of context. "I don't think it's appropriate," it read. "Someone should know." That was it. No names, no details, no accusation I could respond to. Just enough to exist. Just enough to be passed along. I sat there staring at the screen longer than I want to admit. Not because I didn't know what it implied, but because I knew how easily implication becomes consensus once the right people repeat it. My first instinct was to walk down the hall and shut it down. Demand clarity. Demand facts. That's the version of myself I've relied on for decades. Calm. Direct. Certain. But this wasn't about facts. It was about optics. I didn't see her all day. Not until late afternoon, when most people had already left and the building had that hollow end-of-day quiet. I spotted her through the glass, standing in her office with the lights still on, speaking into her phone. She noticed me at the same time. Her expression changed. Not alarm. Recognition. She ended the call quickly and stepped into the hallway before I could decide whether approaching her was a mistake. "This is moving faster than I expected," she said. That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. Just confirmation. "Did you know about this?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. That pause told me more than words would have. "I knew someone might talk," she said finally. I didn't know how. There it was. The risk I tried not to name. "I got an email," I said. No details. Just enough to exist. She nodded once. That's usually how it's done. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear exactly, but something close to it. The understanding that this wasn't just about me anymore. "We should clarify this," I said. Together. That was the moment she looked at me differently. Not colder. Sharper. "No," she said. "We shouldn't." That word landed harder than anything else that day. "If we do that," she continued, "we turn speculation into confirmation. We give people a center to point at." "So we do nothing?" I asked. "We do less," she replied. "We hold our ground. Separately." I wanted to argue. To say that separation looks like guilt when you're the one being discussed. But I also knew she wasn't wrong. Still, something about the ease with which she said it unsettled me. "And if they keep talking?" I asked. "They will," she said. "For a while." "And if it lands on your desk?" I pressed. Her voice lowered then. Not intimate. Controlled. "Then I handle it." I looked at her and realized the difference between us hadn't changed. She could afford for this to be strategic. I couldn't afford for it to be personal. That was my choice, right there in the hallway. Trust her judgment and risk becoming invisible again. Or protect my own name and risk becoming the problem. "I don't disappear well," I said quietly. She studied me for a moment. "Then be careful what you're seen doing," she replied. That wasn't advice. It was a boundary. She turned back toward her office, already finished with the conversation. I stayed where I was, listening to the distant sound of someone laughing down the hall, unaware of how close a story was to forming. As I left the building that evening, my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't expected. Another forwarded message. Different sender. Same tone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was momentum. And whatever choice I made next wouldn't just define how this ended. It would decide who took the first real hit when it did. The first time I thought it was over, it wasn't a rumor or an email that convinced me. It was a calendar invite. No subject line that made sense. Just a time slot and 2 words sitting on my screen like a verdict. HR review. 45 minutes. Long enough to end a career. Short enough to make you look guilty for needing more time. I didn't react out loud. I didn't swear. I just sat there, suddenly aware of how quiet my office was, how thin the walls felt. At my age, your stomach doesn't drop in moments like that. It tightens like it's bracing. That day, she kept her distance. Not dramatic distance. Professional distance. The kind that tells everyone, there is nothing here to see. She walked past me without looking. Smiled at the right people. Spoke to legal. Nodded to HR. I told myself it was strategy. I told myself she was protecting us. But the building felt different by mid-morning. Conversations softened when I approached. Laughter stopped a beat too early. Nobody was hostile. They were careful. Like they didn't want to be seen, choosing wrong. I kept hearing fragments. I heard, apparently, it's not a good look. Optics. As if we were talking about lighting, not livelihoods. I checked my phone twice. No message. Checked my inbox. Nothing. Just that HR block sitting on my calendar, counting down. My first instinct was to go to her office and ask the only question that mattered. Are you going to let this happen? Then I pictured how that would look. The man already being discussed, suddenly closing the CEO's door. That wouldn't be courage. It would be proof. So I did what men like me have always done when the ground feels unstable. I tried to disappear. I answered emails fast. Made myself useful. Kept my distance from everyone, especially her. For a few hours, it almost worked. Then my badge beeped red at the executive corridor. One sharp sound. One small denial. The guard barely looked up. You're fine, he said. Permissions update. Happens all the time. But my face got hot anyway. Not because of the beep. Because someone could quietly change where I was allowed to stand. I turned around and walked away. That's when I saw her at the end of the hallway, speaking with legal. Focused. Controlled. She looked up just long enough to see me. Then she tapped the side of her folder twice. Not here. Not now. That should have comforted me. Instead, it tightened my chest. The HR meeting crept closer. I tried to reason it away. Maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe it was routine. My body didn't believe any of it. My hands wouldn't stay still. My mouth kept going dry. That's when the choice became real. Go to HR and get ahead of it. Explain everything, control the narrative. Or trust her silence. Trust that she was already moving pieces I couldn't see. 5 minutes before the meeting, my phone buzzed. One text. No greeting. No name. Don't go in. Wait. I stood up anyway. Not toward HR, toward the stairwell. Concrete. Stale air. Halfway down, footsteps followed. A familiar voice, low and controlled. Keep walking, she said. Don't turn around. I did. She caught up one flight lower, matching my pace like this was normal. Someone filed a complaint, she said quietly. Not about you. About me. You were included as supporting detail. Supporting detail. Like I wasn't the subject, just the leverage. Who? I asked. Not yet, she said. And you don't want the wrong name becoming the story. So the meeting? I asked. Cancelled, she said. It was never meant to be a meeting. It was a trap. I stopped. She stopped too. You used me, I said. It came out older than the moment. I protected you, she replied. By keeping you out of a room, they wanted you in. I wanted to believe her. I almost did. What do you need from me? I asked. She finally looked at me fully. I need you to look normal, she said. Don't withdraw. Don't overcorrect. And if anyone asks something that feels too curious, tell me exactly how they phrase it. She stepped back, giving me space. One more thing, she added. If this turns ugly, they won't come for me first. I felt my stomach twist. They'll come for you, she said. Because you're safer. She left me there. When I walked back into the office, my phone buzzed again. A screenshot. A group chat. My name. Her name. And one sentence I hadn't seen before. HR's finally dealing with it today. My hands went cold. Because now it wasn't just momentum. It was timing. And someone had just proven they were watching the clock. The night before everything settled, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of losing my job. That fear had already burned itself out. What kept me awake was something quieter. The question of what I would do if this ended the way it probably should. By morning, the building felt different again. Not tense. Empty. Like the storm had passed, and everyone was pretending they hadn't checked the windows. There was no dramatic summons. No final confrontation. Just a request from HR to clarify the timeline. Polite language. Neutral tone. The kind of phrasing that tells you the decision is already leaning one way. I walked into that room alone. No lawyer. No speeches prepared. I decided that if I was going to lose something, it wouldn't be my dignity. They asked simple questions. Who said what? When? Where I stood? Where she stood? I answered carefully, but not defensively. I didn't speculate. I didn't protect anyone with half-truths. I told the story the way it happened, not the way it could be twisted to help me. That was my choice. Not because it was brave. Because it was clean. When I left, nothing was resolved. That was strangely comforting. Real life doesn't tie itself up in a meeting room. I didn't see her for the rest of the day. That was harder than I expected. Late afternoon, as the building thinned out, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I recognize now. Walk. No explanation. No instructions. Just that word. We didn't meet inside. We walked outside, along the street where people passed without paying us any attention. No glass walls. No whispers. Just two people moving in the same direction. She didn't start with an apology. I respected her for that. They're closing it, she said finally. Not because it was nothing. Because it was handled. I nodded. That made sense. And you, she asked. I'll be fine, I said. Not untouched. But fine. We walked a little longer before she spoke again. I didn't protect you because I owed you, she said. I did it because I don't use people as shields. That mattered more than she knew. I didn't tell them everything, she continued. Some things don't belong in a file. I stopped walking then. She stopped too. That's where I needed to be sure, I said, that we were choosing the same line. She met my eyes. No power in her expression now. Just clarity. We were, she said. There was no embrace. No promise. No soft ending. Just a shared understanding that something had passed between us and wouldn't be repeated the same way. I'm stepping back, I said. Not because I was asked to. Because I don't want to live under a microscope. She nodded once. That's a cost, she said. Most people don't choose it. I know, I replied. But I know what happens if I don't. We stood there a moment longer, listening to traffic, to ordinary life moving without us. Be careful, she said, not as a warning, as a courtesy. So should you, I answered. We went our separate ways without looking back. Weeks later, things were normal again. As normal as they get. My name still carried a faint echo in certain rooms. Hers carried weight, as it always had. Nothing happened between us after that. And that's the point most people miss. This wasn't a story about getting something. It was a story about not losing myself while something was taken away. I learned where my line was. I learned what silence costs. And I learned that sometimes the most adult choice isn't holding on or letting go. It's knowing exactly when to step aside and being able to live with it afterward. That was the ending. Not clean, not romantic, but honest. And at my age, that's the only kind that lasts.